Elite Facts presents
The Thousand-Year Empire. 7 Facts about the Byzantine Empire.
7.
The Thousand-Year Empire. You're probably all aware of the Roman Empire and how far it reached across Europe, Africa, and Asia. It was pretty big and lasted roughly 503 years from 27 BC to 476 AD. This is a very impressive stretch, but eventually the Roman Empire began to split into 2 distinct halves. From the eastern half would rise the Byzantine Empire, which would last a mighty 1,123 years, from 330 AD until 1453 AD. This makes it the longest-lasting empire in history, a feat that is testament to its strength. It lasted 874 years before it was briefly interrupted in 1204 AD, and even if you count its uninterrupted reign, it is still the longest-lasting empire in history. When Roman Emperor Constantine first reorganized the Roman Empire into East and West, he made the city of Constantinople his eastern capital in 330 AD. It would go on to become one of the wealthiest and most well-defended cities in the world. The city was built up from a previous Greek settlement called Byzantium, from which the empire took its name. The people in the empire itself referred to itself at the time as the Roman Empire, believing themselves to be a continuation of the classical empire. After 610 AD, the empire was more Greek than Roman, however, and the Greeks took over Latin as the official language, and Greek culture came to dominate. At its height in 555 AD, the Byzantine Empire controlled most of the Mediterranean and stretched from southern Spain to eastern Syria, and from southernmost Egypt to the southern Crimea.
6.
Chariot Mafia. Chariot racing had been popular since the times of ancient Greece, and the Romans had kept the tradition alive. The Byzantine amalgamation of these cultures kept the sport going, and it became frighteningly popular. Emperor Constantine I had Christianized the Roman Empire and was not keen on gladiatorial combat, which he considered to be far too pagan in nature, while also being very expensive to put on. Because of this, chariot racing rose again as the #1 sport for the masses of the empire. It became so popular that the sport's fan base became like that of today's soccer or football teams, with fiercely loyal fans. Factions of chariot racers formed and started out a bit like today's sports teams. They would have big races with forever loyal fans who'd wear the team colors. Racers would switch sides, but fans wouldn't. And even the emperors had their own favorite teams. It all went a bit far, though, because as with some of today's sports rivalries, the chariot racing scene gave way to gangs of street hooligans who'd riot and cause damage to property. The rivalries between the blue and green chariot teams got so strong that their supporting factions of fans evolved into borderline medieval mafias. They had influence in government and politics, influence on the military, and even sway in religious matters. The rivalries between these two often erupted into outright gang warfare that resulted in murders in the Hagia Sophia Cathedral and an attempt to overthrow the emperor.
5.
Justin and Justinian. The origins of Emperor Justin I are so humble they sound like something out of Disney. He started his life as a pig farmer in Dardania, a province of the empire in what is now the Balkans. His birth name was Iztok, and he was forced to flee from his home to the big city of Constantinople with nothing more than rags due to a barbarian invasion. Poor, illiterate, and looking to survive, he joined the military and proved himself a fine warrior. He rose through the ranks and became an influential general, and eventually found himself in charge of Emperor Anastasius's palace guard. When Anastasius died, Justin was elected the new emperor. Justin knew he wasn't good at statecraft, so he made sure to listen to his trusted advisors. His most trusted advisor was his nephew, Flavius Petrus Sabatius, who he had adopted as his son. As Justin grew older, he named his adopted son his co-emperor and heir, who himself took command of the empire upon Justin's death as Justinian I. The Disney-like story continues with Justinian, whose origins were similar to those of his uncle and adoptive father. Justinian ruled as regent towards the end of Justin's life and brought the Byzantine Empire into a new age of prosperity and is considered the last true Roman emperor. He oversaw the construction of great works like the construction of the Hagia Sophia Cathedral, saw off the aforementioned chariot mafias who tried to overthrow him, and even survived one of the first recorded outbreaks of bubonic plague, which earned him a sainthood. He even defied the social norms and married his love Theodora, who was initially a courtesan, and his mistress. Their marriage briefly united the two main forms of Christianity after the Great Schism, and after her death, Justinian worked tirelessly to repair the schism in her memory. It was arguably the closest the church came to reunification. The power couple also oversaw the reconquest of most of the old Roman Empire.
4.
Greek fire. You might think napalm is a rather recent invention created in Harvard labs in 1942, but what is believed to be an early form of napalm was created and used by the Byzantines in 672 AD. It became known as Greek fire. In its day, it was practically a super weapon and proved to be devastating in battle. It was usually delivered by means of a type of flamethrower that would spew the burning liquid towards a target with devastating effect. Like napalm, it was sticky and would burn on water. This made it especially useful in naval warfare, as wooden ships would either be engulfed in unquenchable flames or face a literal sea of fire. Its ignition is said to have sounded like divine thunder, and it could also be deployed in bomb form from pots. The recipe for this terror weapon was such a closely guarded state secret that even today, scientists and historians alike are still not sure how exactly they made it.
3.
The Varangian Guard. By the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire had some mixed relations with its neighbors, especially with the Kievan Rus in the northeast. After a series of conflicts between the Byzantines and the Rus, the two peoples earned a mutual respect for each other. Basil II, who became emperor in 678 AD, distrusted his Byzantine bodyguards, who in the past had used and abused their influence and been the downfall of previous emperors. Instead, he recruited mercenaries from the Rus to serve as his bodyguards. After the ascension of King Vladimir I brought about the Christianization of the Kiev Rus, Emperor Basil struck a new deal with Vladimir that saw the official formation of the Varangian Guard. The Guard earned a fearsome reputation and attracted many Norse warriors from Scandinavia, even from as far as Iceland. After the Norman conquest of England, the Guard's ranks swelled with Anglo-Saxons looking for a new life. The Varangian Guard was a diverse bunch of elite warriors. The Guard were popular with the emperors because they lived by Germano-Norse warrior traditions and lived by the oaths of loyalty they swore to the emperor. They would fight to the death while the emperor lived out loyal duty, but if the emperor died, then they were allowed to loot as much of his wealth from the palace as they could. This may sound a bit like backstabbing, but it was a Norse tradition that the Byzantines allowed because the promise of such wealth attracted more men to the ranks of the Guard and unused loyalty. On the battlefield, the Varangi would often be deployed only at critical moments to act as elite shock troops, and were famed for their use of the fearsome Dane axe.
2.
Byzantine diplomacy. You won't make an empire last over 1,000 years without knowing how to make friends and being able to talk your way out of problems. The Byzantines naturally had great diplomatic acumen. The Byzantine Empire may have maintained a professional army, but given how much the empire covered at its height and that it had to deal with significant threats on both its eastern and western fronts, it couldn't rely entirely on its army. Words can of course cut deeper than swords. Byzantines treated diplomacy as war waged with words and would seek victory by any means. Byzantines made great use of their diplomatic skills in keeping their enemies at bay. If a barbarian people threatened them, they'd invite their leader to meet the emperor and treat him with all the pomp and circumstance of a king. Translators who could speak their guests' language would be kept on hand, and the negotiators would learn as much of their guests' culture and customs as they could. Emissaries would return home feeling both honored and impressed. If friendliness failed, the Byzantine Empire was rather rich, so they would just throw money at the problem. They were not above buying off potential enemies. They could afford it. If that didn't work, then they would simply start paying their enemies' enemies.
1.
The Fourth Crusade. The usual portrayal is that the Crusades were all an effort of European Christians to take the Holy Land in the name of Christianity from Arab Muslim forces. It turns out that the Crusaders were not always so clear-cut in their goals, as the Fourth Crusade of 1204 AD ended up a massive Christian embarrassment and started the downfall of the Byzantine Empire. As with most crusades, it started when the current pope declared the need to retake Jerusalem. The Crusaders had intended to invade the Holy Land from Egypt, but ended up taking a hell of a diversion when they were approached by exiled Byzantine prince Alexios Angelos. Prince Alexios promised the Crusaders that if they helped make him the Byzantine emperor, he provided the Crusaders with both military and financial assistance. The Crusaders bought into this idea and turned up in force outside Constantinople. After a few skirmishes, the current emperor had fled the city, and the citizens were forced to declare Prince Alexios the new emperor. How did this turn out? Not well at all. Alexios had grossly overestimated the wealth of the empire, which had deteriorated significantly over the past 50 years, and was forced to steal from his own people to try and pay the Crusaders the amount he had promised them. Realizing they weren't going to get paid, the Crusaders opted to sack the city in order to get their payment. Many citizens died, and a lot of the city was destroyed, including churches and monasteries, which earned scorn from the Crusaders' own pope. The ruin and loss of Constantinople cost the Byzantines significantly, and though they eventually took back the city and recovered, the empire was never the same. As for the Crusaders, they returned home wealthy but shamed, having never made it to the Holy Land. 249 years later, Constantinople would fall to the Ottoman Turks, having never fully recovered from the Fourth Crusade, and with it fell the Byzantine Empire too.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more elite facts.